Welcome to this journey through one of the most unsettling cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The autumn of 1898 brought an unusual silence to the small township of Wickfield, Massachusetts. Nestled between the rolling Berkshire Mountains and the winding Housatonic River, this community of barely 300 souls was known primarily for its textile mill and the hard-working families who operated it. Among them were the Harmonys, a name that would later be spoken in whispers across 3 counties. On October 17, 1898, Frederick Harmony, owner of the prosperous Harmony Textile Company, did not arrive at his office. His ledger, meticulously maintained for 23 years without a single missed entry, remained unmarked that Monday. By Tuesday morning, when his secretary Margaret Wilson finally gathered the courage to visit the Harmony estate on Ridgewood Hill, she'd discovered the front door slightly ajar. The sprawling Victorian mansion, usually maintained with military precision, stood silent. No servants responded to her calls. No movement disturbed the heavy drapes. The family, Frederick, his wife Eleanor, and his brother Thomas, had seemingly vanished overnight, leaving behind a dining table set for an evening meal that was never consumed. What followed was perhaps the most perplexing investigation ever conducted in Berkshire County. The disappearance of an entire household, wealthy, respected, and without apparent enemies, defied explanation. Yet more disturbing than their absence was what remained: 3 empty beds, made with hospital corners, a grandfather clock stopped precisely at 9:17, and a leather-bound journal open on Frederick's desk with a single line written in handwriting that his secretary swore did not belong to her employer. "They've come to collect what's owed." In the months that followed, theories emerged and dissolved like morning fog. Some spoke of financial ruin, others of familial discord. But those who knew the Harmonys well, those who had been permitted into the inner sanctum of their lives, whispered of something far more sinister, something that had been building for years behind the elegant facade of the hilltop mansion, something that went beyond mere disappearance. This is the documented account of the Harmony family case of 1898, a story pieced together from police records, personal correspondence, newspaper accounts, and the testimonies of those who witnessed the slow unraveling of what appeared to be the perfect American family. This is a journey into the shadows of the human mind, where the most terrifying monsters are not those that hide under beds, but those that hide behind smiles at the dinner table. The Harmony name had been synonymous with prosperity in Wickfield since 1875, when Frederick Harmony, then a young man of 27, arrived from Philadelphia with significant capital and ambitious plans. Within 3 years, he had established the Harmony Textile Company, employing nearly 60 local workers and producing some of the finest wool fabrics in Massachusetts. By 1880, the grand house on Ridgewood Hill was completed, 3 stories of Victorian splendor with a view that encompassed the entire valley. To the casual observer, the Harmony household appeared to be the embodiment of late 19th century success. Frederick was described in the Wickfield Gazette as a gentleman of impeccable bearing and considerable intellect, while his wife Eleanor was known for her elaborate dinner parties and generous contributions to the local church. Thomas Harmony, Frederick's younger brother by 5 years, had joined the household in 1889, after what was described as unfortunate business ventures in Boston. He served as the mill's accountant and was rarely seen in town except on Sundays, when he accompanied the family to services at St. Michael's Episcopal Church. The Harmony household kept to themselves, recalled Jacob Moore, who delivered groceries to the estate twice weekly between 1895 and 1898. Mrs. Z. Harmony would provide me with a list, very specific, written in the finest penmanship I ever saw. But in 3 years I was never invited further than the kitchen entrance. The cook, Mrs. Abernathy, would sometimes offer me tea on cold days, but always in whispers, always with one eye on the door. Mrs. Abernathy was one of 4 household staff who disappeared along with the family, the others being the housemaid, Mary Winters, the groundskeeper, William Collins, and Frederick's personal valet, James Howard. None of these individuals were ever seen again, and inquiries to their families revealed that none had mentioned plans to leave their positions. William spoke to me the Sunday before they all vanished, testified Collins's brother during the subsequent investigation. Said nothing about leaving, but mentioned that the atmosphere in the house had changed. Said the master had taken to locking doors that had never been locked before, and that Mrs. Harmony had stopped playing the piano in the evenings. Said it was quiet in a way that made his skin crawl. This quietness, this gradual withdrawal, appears repeatedly in accounts from the final months before the disappearance. The Harmonys declined invitations to social gatherings they would previously have attended without question. Eleanor ceased her volunteer work at the library. Frederick began sending an assistant to business meetings he would once have considered essential. I called upon Mrs. Harmony in early September, recalled Beatrice Whitmore, wife of the local physician. I found her changed, thinner certainly, with a pallor that suggested illness. But it was her manner that concerned me most. Throughout our conversation, her attention repeatedly drifted to the windows as though she expected to see something or someone approaching the house. When I inquired directly about her health, she smiled in a way that never reached her eyes and said only, "We are all as we deserve to be, Beatrice." This cryptic response, noted in Mrs. Whitmore's personal diary, takes on particular significance when considered alongside other documents that would later come to light. But in those final weeks of summer transitioning to fall, no one recognized these subtle shifts as harbingers of what was to come. The town of Wickfield continued its placid existence. The mill operated efficiently under Frederick's increasingly distant management, and the Harmony household maintained its facade of respectability, even as something within its walls began to fracture. On the afternoon of October 16, 1898, the day before the disappearance was discovered, multiple witnesses reported seeing Frederick Harmony at the Western Union Telegraph Office in town. The clerk, Nathan Pierce, later testified that Mr. Harmony sent a telegram to an address in Philadelphia, the contents of which read simply, "Arrangements complete. Waiting concluded." When asked about the meaning of this message, Pierce stated that Harmony offered no explanation and appeared unusually agitated, repeatedly checking his pocket watch during the brief transaction. This telegram, like so many other pieces of the Harmony puzzle, led investigators down paths that ultimately circled back to the central mystery. The Philadelphia address belonged to a boarding house that had burned down in 1896. The recipient name provided, J. Winters, matched no records in Philadelphia or the surrounding areas. As darkness fell on that final evening, the Harmony household prepared for what appeared to be a normal Sunday dinner. Mrs. Abernathy had prepared a roast with seasonal vegetables, fresh bread, and an apple tart for dessert, all found untouched the following day. 4 places had been set at the dining table, though the household normally numbered only 3. The 4th setting, positioned at the head of the table opposite Frederick's usual place, included a wine glass filled with what was later determined to be not wine, but water from the Housatonic River. By morning, they were gone. No carriages were reported on the road to the train station. No horses were missing from the stables. No trunks or personal items appeared to have been packed. It was as though the inhabitants of the house had simply stepped away from their lives, leaving behind the material shells of their existence. The investigation that followed was hampered by several factors that were unusual even by the limited forensic standards of the 1890s. First, a severe rainstorm struck the region on the night of October 17th, washing away any potential footprints or tracks that might have indicated how the family left the property. Second, key documents, including Frederick Harmony's business records for the previous 6 months, were discovered to be missing from both the house and his office at the mill. Third, and perhaps most troubling, was the behavior of Sheriff Roland Hayes, who initially seemed reluctant to pursue the case with appropriate vigor. Hayes kept insisting they'd simply gone on an unannounced trip, reported the Wickfield Gazette on October 25th. Even when presented with the strange circumstances, the abandoned meal, the stopped clock, the lack of packed belongings, he maintained that wealthy folks often behave in ways working people don't understand. This dismissive attitude changed abruptly on November 3rd, when Hayes received a letter that, according to his deputy, caused him to turn as white as a sheet. The contents of this letter were never disclosed publicly, but the investigation intensified immediately afterward. Hayes requested assistance from detectives in Boston, ordered a dragging of the Housatonic River, and personally interviewed every employee of the Harmony Textile Company. One such employee, loom operator Edith Blackwood, provided testimony that cast the disappearance in an even more disturbing light. "Mr. Harmony came to my station the Friday before he vanished," she stated. "He never did this, never spoke directly to those of us who worked the floor. But there he was, standing beside my loom, watching me work. After several minutes, he asked, 'Do you believe a pattern, once established, can ever truly be broken?' Before I could answer, he placed his hand on one of the threads and said, 'Even a single strand out of place changes everything that follows.' Then he walked away. His hand was shaking so badly he nearly disrupted the entire weave. This strange encounter was not isolated. 3 other mill workers reported unusual interactions with Frederick Harmony in the days leading up to the disappearance. Night watchman Peter Simmons described finding Harmony in the empty mill at 2:06 a.m. on October 14th, standing motionless in the center of the production floor, staring up at the ceiling beams. When questioned, Harmony allegedly replied, "I'm listening to the building breathe. Everything has a rhythm, Mr. Simmons. Everything has a pulse that eventually stops." As autumn deepened into winter, the investigation continued without significant progress. The river dragging yielded nothing related to the family. Inquiries sent to other towns and cities returned no sightings of the Harmonies or their missing staff. The mill continued to operate under the management of Frederick's lawyers, who had contingency instructions but no explanation for their client's disappearance. Then, in January 1899, a discovery was made that shifted the focus of the investigation entirely. A young boy exploring the woods approximately 2 miles from the Harmony estate found an item partially buried in the frozen ground. Eleanor Harmony's distinctive silver hand mirror, its handle engraved with her initials. The discovery location, a small clearing near what locals called Widow's Creek, had not been previously searched. Sheriff Hayes organized a thorough exploration of the area, which revealed additional items: a man's pocket watch, identified as belonging to Thomas Harmony, a pearl hairpin, known to be favored by Eleanor, and most significantly, pages torn from what appeared to be a personal journal. These pages, damaged by exposure to the elements but still partially legible, contained handwriting matched to Eleanor Harmony. The fragmented text referenced the weight of secrets and the price of silence, along with repeated mentions of the agreement and what was promised in 75. This last reference, 1875, the year Frederick Harmony arrived in Wickfield, prompted investigators to dig deeper into his background. What they discovered contradicted much of what the town had accepted as fact. There was no record of a Frederick Harmony in Philadelphia prior to 1870. The substantial capital he had brought to Wickfield had no clear source. Most troublingly, a Frederick Harmony had been reported missing in Hartford, Connecticut, in 1874, along with a significant amount of money from the textile company where he had been employed as a junior accountant. Was the Frederick Harmony of Wickfield an impostor who had stolen another man's identity and funds? The physical description of the missing Hartford accountant was similar, but not conclusively matched to the Wickfield mill owner. Records from that period remain incomplete, and the Hartford company in question had dissolved by 1880, making verification impossible. What is documented, however, is that Sheriff Hayes traveled to Philadelphia in February 1899, returning after 2 weeks with a grave expression and a reluctance to discuss his findings. He submitted a report to the county judge that was subsequently sealed. When pressed by the editor of the Wickfield Gazette for information, Hayes would say only, "Some truth served no purpose but to disturb the peace of the innocent." The investigation officially remained open, but active pursuit of leads dwindled as 1899 progressed. The Harmony estate stood empty, its contents eventually auctioned to settle business debts that mysteriously began to surface once it became clear the family would not return. The textile mill was sold to a conglomerate from New York, its name changed, its connection to the Harmony family deliberately obscured. And there the matter might have rested, becoming nothing more than a local legend had it not been for the Great Flood of 1903, which changed the course of the Housatonic River and revealed what the water had concealed for nearly 5 years. On April 12, 1903, as the floodwaters receded, a section of riverbank approximately 4 miles downstream from Wickfield collapsed, exposing a small cave in the limestone that had previously been submerged. Inside this natural chamber, partially preserved by the cold water and lack of oxygen, were items that unmistakably belonged to the Harmony household. A woman's shoe identified as Eleanor's, Thomas Harmony's distinctive silver-handled walking stick, and most disturbingly, the leather-bound journal from Frederick's desk, the same journal that had been found open on the night of the disappearance. The journal, now preserved in the Berkshire Historical Society archives, contains entries dating back to 1875. The early pages detail Frederick's establishment in Wickfield and the construction of both the mill and the mansion with an enthusiasm that borders on obsession. As the years progress, however, the tone shifts subtly. Entries become shorter, more cryptic. References appear to the other, and the obligation without clear explanation. The final dated entry, October 15, 1898, 2 days before the disappearance was discovered, reads simply, "It has found us again. The pattern cannot be broken. What was woven cannot be undone." The remainder of the journal consists of a single, undated entry written in a different hand, presumably the same hand that wrote the line discovered on the night of the disappearance. This extended passage, covering nearly 10 pages, purports to tell the true history of Frederick Harmony and the events that led to that final night in October 1898. According to this account, the man known as Frederick Harmony was born Frederick Winters in a small town in upstate New York in 1848. As a young man, he worked as an apprentice to a textile merchant who specialized in importing exotic fabrics from India and the Far East. During a buying trip to Philadelphia in 1873, Winters allegedly encountered an individual of unusual persuasion who offered him an opportunity, financial backing to establish his own textile operation in exchange for considerations to be collected at a time of the backer's choosing. The journal claims that Winters accepted this offer, using his benefactor's funds to establish himself in Wickfield under the appropriated name of Harmony. The mill prospered beyond all expectations, and for several years Winters' shark Harmony heard nothing from his mysterious backer. He married Eleanor, built his mansion, and gradually convinced himself that the arrangement had been forgotten or forgiven. In 1889, however, a man claiming to be the representative of the original benefactor appeared in Wickfield. This individual presented himself publicly as Thomas Harmony, Frederick's younger brother, but according to the journal, no such brother had ever existed. Thomas took up residence in the mansion and assumed the role of company accountant, positions that allowed him to monitor Frederick's activities while maintaining the fiction of familial connection. The journal describes a gradual psychological torment that followed. Thomas would disappear for weeks, then return with cryptic messages from the benefactor. He spoke of a final collection that would eventually come due. His presence in the household created constant tension, particularly for Eleanor, who reportedly began to suspect that her husband's history was not as he had claimed. The final pages of the journal describe the events of October 16, 1898, in fragmented, often incoherent terms. They suggest that multiple representatives arrived at the Harmony estate that evening, individuals who had been watching the family for years from various positions within the community. The journal claims that Frederick, Eleanor, Thomas, and the household staff were taken to fulfill the obligation, though the nature of this obligation remains unclear. The writing becomes increasingly disjointed, with references to the pattern being completed and threads returning to their source. The journal concludes with a statement that has been the subject of debate among historians and criminologists for decades. The harmony that Wickfield knew was merely a temporary arrangement of threads. We have reclaimed what was ours. We have rewoven what was borrowed. Let all who consider similar bargains understand, the loom never stops turning. This account, while compelling in its detail, presents numerous problems as historical evidence. The handwriting of the final entry has never been conclusively identified. The claims regarding Frederick's true identity can't be verified through independent records. Most significantly, the journal was discovered in circumstances that suggest it could have been placed in the riverbank cave at any point after the disappearance, perhaps by someone seeking to create a particular narrative around the already mysterious case. One aspect of the journal that particularly troubled investigators was its detailed knowledge of Eleanor Harmony's private thoughts in the weeks before the disappearance. The account describes her growing suspicion of both Frederick and Thomas, her discovery of correspondence that contradicted her husband's claimed history, and her attempts to investigate independently. According to the journal, Eleanor had planned to leave the household on October 18th, the day after they vanished, having arranged for a former school friend to meet her at the Pittsfield train station. This friend, Catherine Renfield of Boston, was located and interviewed in 1904 after the journal's discovery. She confirmed that she had indeed received a letter from Eleanor in early October 1898, requesting a discreet meeting. The letter, which Renfield had preserved, contained the cryptic line, "I fear that I have been living with strangers wearing familiar faces. I must remove myself before the masquerade concludes." Renfield traveled to Pittsfield as arranged, but, finding no sign of Eleanor, assumed her friend had changed her plans and returned to Boston without further inquiry. Sheriff Hayes, when presented with the journal in 1903, reportedly refused to read it. According to the deputy present, Hayes stated, "I've seen enough in Philadelphia to know what that book contains." He died 3 months later of what was described as acute melancholia, leading to heart failure. Before his death, however, Hayes did leave one significant document, a sealed letter addressed to future investigators of the Harmony case, with instructions that it be opened only if new evidence emerged. This letter remained sealed in the county records until 1947, when a historian researching New England textile industry development sought access to the Harmony files. The contents of the letter, now housed in the Massachusetts State Archives, provide a troubling perspective from the man who led the original investigation. Hayes wrote, "What I discovered in Philadelphia cannot be reconciled with any natural understanding of our world. The entity known to Wickfield as Frederick Harmony's benefactor has existed under many names throughout recorded history. I have seen ledgers dating to the early 1700s that record identical transactions, financial backing provided to ambitious young men, always with the same deferred payment terms, always resulting in the same disappearance when accounts came due. The pattern is consistent across centuries and continents. I spoke with a man in Philadelphia who claimed to be 107 years old, though he appeared no more than 60. He told me he had been present when the entity first arrived in America in 1692. He showed me a fabric sample allegedly produced by the entity's first American textile operation, a pattern so complex it seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Holding it caused a sensation I cannot adequately describe, a feeling of falling while standing perfectly still. I will not detail what else I learned, for I fear such knowledge is itself a contagion that spreads from mind to mind. I have requested that all documents related to my Philadelphia investigation be destroyed upon my death. If you are reading this letter, know only that the Harmony family is beyond our reach and beyond our help. Some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us that the world we think we understand is merely a comforting illusion, a thin fabric stretched across an abyss we could not bear to contemplate directly. Whether Hayes actually destroyed his Philadelphia findings remains unclear. County records indicate that a fire in the sheriff's office in May 1899, 3 days after his return, destroyed numerous documents. The fire was attributed to a knocked-over oil lamp, though Night Deputy Samuel Prescott later claimed that Hayes had been alone in the office that evening, having sent all staff home early. In the decades that followed, the Harmony case faded from public consciousness. The mansion on Ridgewood Hill burned to the ground in 1917, the ruins eventually reclaimed by Forrest. The mill operated under various owners until 1952, when textile production shifted to the southern states, leaving Wickfield with little more than its history. Occasional articles appeared in regional newspapers on the anniversaries of the disappearance. Amateur investigators sometimes visited the town, walking the banks of the Housatonic or hiking to the overgrown foundation of the Harmony estate. In 1968, a graduate student in criminology from Boston University attempted to reconstruct the case from surviving records, but her thesis was never published. She reportedly abandoned the project after experiencing what she described in a letter to her advisor as a profound sense of being watched whenever I handle the primary materials. The only photograph known to exist of the Harmony family, a formal portrait taken in 1896, was displayed in the Wickfield Historical Society until 1965, when it was removed from exhibition following complaints from visitors who reported feeling inexplicably distressed after viewing it. The curator noted in the removal documentation that the photograph had developed unexplained discolorations over the years, particularly around the figure's eyes. A previously overlooked aspect of the case emerged in 1957 when renovations to St. Michael's Episcopal Church, the Harmony family's place of worship, uncovered a hidden compartment beneath the floor of Pew 17, traditionally reserved for prominent families. Inside was a small leather pouch containing a letter written in Eleanor Harmony's hand, apparently intended for the church reverend. The letter, dated October 14, 1898, 3 days before the disappearance was discovered, was never delivered. Reverend Mills, it began, I write to you not as a congregant seeking spiritual guidance, but as a woman in fear for her soul. I have come to believe that the man who sits beside me in your church each Sunday is not the man I married. There are moments, brief, terrifying moments, when his face seems to shift, revealing something beneath that I cannot comprehend. Thomas is worse. Last night I observed him in the garden, standing motionless for 3 hours in the rain, his eyes fixed on the house. When he finally came inside, his clothes were perfectly dry. I have found documents in Frederick's study that suggest our entire life in Wickfield has been constructed as an elaborate facade. The mill, the house, our social position, all apparently part of some arrangement made before I entered the picture. I do not understand the nature of this arrangement, but I fear the reckoning is approaching. Frederick speaks in his sleep now, repeating the same phrase, "They are coming to collect." I plan to leave tomorrow for Boston. I would go tonight, but I must first secure certain papers that I believe may explain what is happening. If you do not see me at Sunday services, please alert Sheriff Hayes immediately. Do not, under any circumstances, approach the house yourself. The letter was signed Eleanor Harmony, followed by a postscript. I have come to believe that the distinctive pattern of fabric produced by my husband's mill is not merely a design, but a message, or perhaps a map. When viewed in the correct light, it seems to depict something trying to enter our world through a narrowing gap. Reverend Abraham Mills, to whom the letter was addressed, had died in 1902, never having mentioned any concerns about the Harmony family. Church records indicate that he took a leave of absence for nervous exhaustion in November 1898. shortly after the disappearance and spent 6 months recovering at a sanitarium in Vermont. Upon his return, he reportedly refused to discuss the Harmony case and requested reassignment to a different parish, a request that was granted in 1900. Today, the land where the Harmony estate once stood is part of the Berkshire National Forest. Hikers occasionally report finding small items, buttons, coins, fragments of porcelain, that may or may not have belonged to the vanished household. The cave where the journal was discovered has long since collapsed, the river having reclaimed its secret chamber during subsequent floods. The Wickfield Textile Mill building still stands, though it has been repurposed several times over the decades, first as a warehouse, then as a factory producing electrical components, and finally, since 1997, as an artists' cooperative. Residents and visitors to the building have reported unusual acoustic phenomena, particularly in the former production floor where the looms once operated. Sound seems to behave strangely there. Voices echo when they shouldn't. Whispers carry across impossible distances, and many describe hearing a rhythmic clicking reminiscent of weaving machinery, even when the building is silent. In 1962, during renovations to convert the space to electronics manufacturing, workers discovered a sealed room in the basement level, a space that did not appear on any existing floor plans. The room contained nothing but a wooden loom of unusual design, described by the foreman as looking older than the building itself. The wood was reportedly in pristine condition despite its apparent age. When touched, it felt unnaturally warm. The company owner ordered the loom removed and destroyed, though no record exists confirming this was done. One worker involved in the renovation, Martin Keller, gave an interview to the Berkshire Eagle in 1980, claiming that strange events followed the discovery of the loom. Men would find themselves in that basement room with no memory of how they got there, he stated. Tools would disappear and reappear in different locations. And the dreams, everyone on the crew started having the same dream, a vast room filled with identical looms, operated by figures whose faces we could never quite see. Keller's account might be dismissed as sensationalism, except that payroll records from the renovation company confirm an unusual pattern. Within 6 months of the project's completion, every worker who had been present when the hidden room was discovered had left the company. 2 were committed to psychiatric institutions. 3 moved away from the area without forwarding addresses. 1, the foreman who first touched the loom, disappeared while hiking in the woods near the former Harmony estate. What remains is the central question that has haunted this case for over a century. What happened to the Harmony family on that October night in 1898? Were they victims of elaborate fraud, as some aspects of the journal suggest? Did they flee from threats either real or imagined? Or is there truth to the more disturbing implication that Frederick Harmony made a bargain with forces he didn't fully understand, and eventually payment came due? In 1969, folklorist Margaret Benson documented a local legend that had developed around the Harmony case, a cautionary tale told to ambitious young people in the Berkshire region. According to the legend, if you stand at the crossroads nearest to where the Harmony estate once stood, at exactly 9:17 p.m. on the anniversary of the disappearance, and speak aloud your deepest desire for success, a stranger will approach with an offer. The details of this offer will seem extraordinarily favorable. The terms of repayment will seem distant and inconsequential. The stranger will present you with a small swatch of fabric as a token of good faith. The legend concludes with a warning. Those who accept such offers are granted exactly what they wish for, often achieving success beyond their wildest dreams. But eventually, perhaps years later, perhaps decades, they vanish without explanation, leaving behind only empty houses and stopped clocks. Benson's academic paper on the legend notes that while such cautionary tales are common throughout New England, the specificity of the Harmony version is unusual. More troubling is her footnote indicating that county records show an unusually high number of unexplained disappearances within a 30-mile radius of Wickfield between 1900 and 1965. 27 cases in total, most involving successful business owners or professionals, all leaving behind situations reminiscent of the Harmony case. Meals uneaten, beds unused, no signs of packing or preparation for departure. In 1967, a descendant of Sheriff Hayes discovered a small wooden box in the attic of the family home, secured with multiple locks and wrapped in fabric that, according to family legend, Hayes had brought back from Philadelphia. Inside was a single item, a swatch of textile approximately 3 inches square, featuring a pattern that, according to the textile conservation experts at the Smithsonian Institution, employs a weaving technique that should be technically impossible. The pattern appears different depending on the angle of viewing and the quality of light. Under certain conditions, it seems to depict a doorway or portal. Under others, it resembles a human face with too many eyes. The swatch was stored in the Berkshire Historical Society until 1968, when it disappeared from its sealed display case. No evidence of forced entry was found. The security guard on duty that night reported no disturbances, but was unable to account for a 3-hour gap in his memory. He resigned his position the following day. The traditional conclusion to such historical mysteries is to suggest that we may never know the truth. In the case of the Harmony family, however, perhaps the more unsettling possibility is that the truth is there, in fragmentary documents, in the recollections of witnesses long dead, in the very patterns of behavior that preceded their disappearance. Perhaps the truth is simply too disquieting to assemble into a coherent narrative that the rational mind can accept. The land where the Harmony estate once stood remains strangely quiet, even on the brightest summer days. Birdsong seems muted there. The wind moves differently through the trees that have grown where the grand house once dominated the hillside. Locals avoid the area after sunset, not out of any articulated fear, but from an instinctive aversion they struggle to explain. In the town archives of Wickfield, preserved in acid-free boxes and rarely requested by researchers, lies the complete collection of documentation related to the Harmony case. Among these papers is a note written by Deputy Samuel Prescott in 1929, 3 decades after the disappearance. Prescott, who had been a young officer during the original investigation, wrote this reflection on the occasion of his retirement from law enforcement. I have served this community for 47 years and have witnessed every manner of human tragedy and cruelty. None of these experiences compares to what I saw in Sheriff Hayes's eyes when he returned from Philadelphia in '99. He knew something that broke him from within. Before he died, I asked him directly what he had discovered about the Harmony family. He was already failing then, his mind slipping away. But his response was clear enough. They were never here, Sam. What we saw was just the shadow cast by something standing in a light we cannot perceive. I've spent 30 years trying to understand what he meant. Tonight, as I look toward Ridgewood Hill from my window, I think perhaps I finally do. And I wish to God I didn't. The Harmony textile pattern, the distinctive weave with an unusual repetitive motif that was the company's signature product, ceased production when the mill changed hands. No samples are known to exist in textile collections or museums. However, in 1957, an elderly woman in Pittsfield, 20 miles from Wickfield, contacted the Historical Society regarding a Harmony fabric coverlet that had been in her family's possession since the 1890s. When the Society representative arrived to examine the item, the woman claimed it had unraveled overnight, leaving nothing but loose threads. A particularly intriguing detail emerged in 1972 when a linguistics professor from Williams College analyzed the phrase found in Frederick's journal on the night of the disappearance. They've come to collect what's owed. The professor noted that while the English appears straightforward, the syntax contains subtle abnormalities, suggesting it may be a translation from another language, but not any known language. The word spacing, punctuation, and certain letter formations indicate what he called a linguistic structure utterly foreign to human communication patterns. His analysis was published in an obscure academic journal and largely forgotten until 1996, when a graduate student discovered that the professor had resigned his position shortly after publishing the paper and apparently relocated to a remote area of Alaska, where he lived without electricity or modern conveniences until his death in 1988. Among his personal effects, discovered by his nephew while settling the estate, was a journal containing hundreds of pages covered in symbols that resemble no known writing system. The final entry, the only one written in English, reads, "I hear the looms at night now. They are weaving something vast. I fear it may be us." The Harmony case has spawned numerous theories over the decades, ranging from the mundane to the fantastic. Some suggest that Frederick was simply a con man who fled with embezzled funds when discovery became imminent. Others propose that the family fell victim to a rural cult or criminal organization. The more esoteric interpretations suggest interdimensional travel, non-human entities, or bargains with forces beyond conventional understanding. What cannot be disputed is the effect the case has had on those who study it closely. Researchers report experiencing unusual dreams, sensing unseen presences, or developing sudden, inexplicable interests in weaving and textile production. Several have abandoned their studies abruptly, sometimes changing careers entirely. A few have disappeared, though these cases are poorly documented and may be coincidental. In 1964, parapsychologist Dr. Elaine Montgomery spent 6 months investigating the former Harmony properties and interviewing elderly residents who had family connections to the case. Her research notes, preserved in the archives of the American Society for Psychical Research, document increasingly disturbed personal observations alongside her formal findings. Her final entry, dated June 17, 1964, reads, "I no longer believe the Harmony family disappeared. I believe they were never fully here to begin with. What Wickfield knew as the Harmonies were projections, three-dimensional shadows cast by entities existing in a state perpendicular to our reality. The textile mill was not their business. It was their anchor point, the mechanism through which they maintained their presence in our world. The patterns they wove served as both sustenance and communication. I've begun to understand their language, the language of warp and weft, of threads interlacing to create messages our minds register not as words, but as unease. They're still here, or rather, they're still adjacent to here. Sometimes, in the right light, I can almost see them operating their true looms, weaving a reality that encompasses ours like a garment encompasses a body." Montgomery's investigation ended when she suffered a stroke that left her unable to speak or write. She spent her remaining years in a care facility where nurses reported that her hands constantly moved in patterns reminiscent of weaving motions. She died in 1971, having never regained the ability to communicate conventionally. However, during her final months, she produced dozens of small, intricate drawings, abstract patterns that textile experts later identified as technically impossible weaving designs. Perhaps the most compelling theory regarding the Harmony case was proposed in 1958 by historian Arthur Whitman, whose specialization in 19th century industrial development led him to examine the business records of the Harmony Textile Company. Whitman noted discrepancies that had been overlooked by earlier investigators. The mill produced significantly more fabric than it sold, with no record of the excess inventory. Raw materials were purchased in quantities that exceeded production requirements, and the company's financial success far outpaced similar operations of the era, despite charging comparable prices. It functioned less as a business enterprise and more as a mechanism for converting raw materials into finished textiles, with profit as an incidental outcome rather than a primary objective. Whitman's research led him to investigate other textile operations of the period where he discovered a pattern. Between 1870 and 1900, 7 textile mills across New England were established by previously unknown individuals who arrived with unexplained wealth, operated with unusual efficiency, and eventually disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The Harmony Textile Company, Whitman wrote, appears to have been operating according to economic principles that defy conventional analysis. In each case, the mill produced distinctive fabric patterns that incorporated unusual weaving techniques. In each case, the founder vanished along with close associates or family members, leaving behind scenes similar to what was found at the Harmony estate. We must consider the possibility, Whitman concluded, that these textile operations served a purpose beyond commercial profit, that the act of weaving itself and the specific patterns being created held significance that transcended ordinary business objectives. Whitman's monograph, published by a small academic press, received little attention at the time. He died of apparent heart failure in 1961, 3 years after its publication. Colleagues at the university where he taught reported that in his final months he had become increasingly paranoid, installing multiple locks on his office door and covering the windows with the very textile samples he had been studying. The mill building in Wickfield has changed hands numerous times since the Harmony disappearance, but one persistent phenomenon has been reported by successive owners: unusual patterns of dust that form on the floor of the former production area. Even after thorough cleaning, thin lines of dust appear overnight, arranged in complex geometric configurations that maintenance staff have described as looking like circuit diagrams or maps of places that don't exist. In 1983, the property owner installed time-lapse cameras to document this phenomenon. The resulting footage showed the dust patterns forming gradually over a period of approximately 6 hours, always between midnight and dawn, always in the absence of any visible human activity. Analysis of the footage by experts in visual effects and practical photography revealed no evidence of tampering or hoaxing. The patterns themselves, when analyzed by mathematicians from MIT, were found to contain geometric properties that, in the words of one researcher, suggest a dimensional complexity beyond standard Euclidean geometry. The current owners of the building, the Ridgewood Arts Collective, have incorporated these dust patterns into their promotional materials, marketing the former mill as a space where creativity transcends ordinary boundaries. Several artists in residence have reported experiencing unusual bursts of inspiration, producing work that deviates dramatically from their established styles. A weaver who spent 6 months in the building in 2005 created a series of textiles that, according to gallery critics, seem to change their patterns when viewed peripherally and evoke emotional responses that cannot be attributed to color or composition alone. One aspect of the Harmony case that has received relatively little attention is the role of Eleanor Harmony in the events leading up to the disappearance. Historical records paint her as a peripheral figure, the socially appropriate wife of a successful businessman, notable primarily for her charitable work and domestic accomplishments. Yet the fragments of her journal discovered at Widow's Creek, along with her undelivered letter to Reverend Mills, suggest a woman of considerable perception and agency who had begun to unravel the mystery surrounding her husband long before the final disappearance. Eleanor Blackwood, her maiden name according to marriage records, came from a respected Boston family with connections to the shipping industry. She was educated at a prestigious women's seminary in Connecticut, and, according to a classmate's later recollection, demonstrated an unusual aptitude for pattern recognition and mathematical reasoning. She met Frederick Harmony at a Boston social function in 1882 and married him 6 months later, relocating to the already established household in Wickfield. What little is known of Eleanor's private thoughts comes primarily from the fragmentary journal pages and her correspondence with Catherine Renfield. These materials suggest that by 1898 she had developed significant doubts about her husband's identity and history. One journal fragment reads, I have compared the handwriting in F's correspondence from before our marriage with his current hand. The differences exceed what might be attributed to age or circumstance. It is as though two different individuals were producing what purports to be the same hand. Another fragment, dated approximately September 1898, states, T. Presumably Thomas watched me from the garden for 3 hours this evening. When I moved from window to window, his gaze followed without his head turning. When darkness fell completely, he remained in the same position, though no human eye could have perceived me through the glass by that time. Perhaps most disturbing is a passage that appears to have been written in the days immediately preceding the disappearance. I dreamt of the mill last night, the sound of the looms, rhythmic, hypnotic. In the dream I walked among them, but they were not weaving fabric. They were weaving people. When I approached the largest loom at the center of the floor, I saw what was being created there, a perfect replica of F, but hollow inside, like a garment waiting to be worn. This dream imagery, dismissed by early investigators as the product of an anxious mind, takes on new significance when considered alongside other elements of the case, particularly the recurring motif of weaving as something beyond mere textile production, as a process of creation or manifestation that extends beyond the material realm. With each pass of the shuttle, features became more defined: eyes, mouths, expressions of terror. I recognized faces, townspeople, servants, myself. In the town of Wickfield today, the Harmony case persists as a combination of historical curiosity and cautionary legend. Local tourism materials mention it briefly, emphasizing the mysterious disappearance while downplaying the more disturbing aspects of the subsequent investigation. The annual Wickfield Heritage Days celebration includes a walking tour that passes the site of the former estate, though guides typically offer only a simplified version of events. We don't dwell on it much, admitted town historian Margaret Collins in a 2002 interview with a regional newspaper. It's part of our history, certainly, but not a part that most residents find comfortable to discuss. There's still a feeling that some stories are better left untold. This reticence extends to the descendants of those originally involved in the case. The great-grandson of Deputy Samuel Prescott, interviewed for the same newspaper article, stated, "My grandfather told me that his father made him promise 2 things: never to enter the old mill building and never to own or wear anything made of woven fabric that came from Wickfield." Our family has kept those promises for 3 generations. One individual who has not shied away from the Harmony case is paranormal investigator David Keller, who has conducted multiple investigations at both the former mill and the estate site over the past decade. Keller's findings, published on various paranormal websites and in his self-published book, The Weavers Between Worlds, include EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recordings captured within the mill building that, when analyzed, appear to contain phrases in multiple languages, including some that language experts cannot identify. What we're dealing with in the Harmony case isn't typical haunting behavior, Keller asserted in a 2018 podcast interview. It's not about restless spirits or traumatic events imprinted on the environment. It's about something that exists in the boundary spaces between established categories, not quite physical, not quite spiritual, operating according to rules we don't understand and possibly can't understand. Keller's most controversial claim involves a room on the 3rd floor of the mill building, a space that, according to floor plans, should be approximately 15 feet square. When measured from the inside, Keller reported, the room dimensions are correct. When measured from the outside, between adjacent known points, the space only accounts for 12 feet. Those missing 3 feet represent a dimensional inconsistency that defies explanation by conventional physics. While Keller's claims have been met with skepticism from both scientific authorities and mainstream paranormal researchers, they echo observations made by previous investigators dating back decades. The mill building has long been associated with subtle spatial anomalies, doors that seem to lead to different rooms depending on the time of day. corridors that feel longer when walked in one direction than the other, spaces where sound behaves in ways that violate acoustic principles. In 1977, a team from a university physics department conducted experiments in the building using laser measuring equipment. Their report, never published but preserved in university archives, notes statistically significant discrepancies in spatial measurements that cannot be attributed to equipment error or observer bias. The team recommended further investigation using more sophisticated instruments, but no follow-up study was conducted. The lead researcher transferred to another university shortly after submitting the report and reportedly refused to discuss the Wickfield experiments with colleagues. The Harmony Estate site, now overgrown and difficult to access, has its own peculiarities. Hikers and wildlife enthusiasts who venture into that area of the forest consistently report a sense of disorientation that cannot be attributed to terrain or weather conditions. GPS devices function erratically within a half-mile radius of where the mansion once stood. Compasses reportedly spin unpredictably when brought to the foundation stones that still mark the building's footprint. Forest rangers responsible for the area maintain an unofficial policy of steering visitors away from the site, not through explicit warnings, but by failing to maintain trails that lead in that direction and omitting the location from official maps. When asked about this practice, a senior ranger who requested anonymity stated, "It's not about perpetuating superstition or ghost stories. It's about the fact that we get called out 2 or 3 times a year to rescue people who've become completely turned around in that area, even experienced hikers with proper equipment. Something about that spot interferes with normal navigation," the ranger added. "Animals avoid it too. You won't find deer bedding down anywhere near those old foundation stones. Birds don't nest in the trees closest to the site. It's one of those places in the forest that feels wrong somehow, too quiet, too still, like it's holding its breath." This sensory disruption, the feeling of wrongness that cannot be articulated in rational terms, appears consistently in accounts of those who have investigated the Harmony case. It suggests a phenomenon that operates at the threshold of perception, affecting individuals on a level beneath or beyond conscious awareness. The consistent reports of temporal and spatial distortions associated with both the mill building and the estate site point to a mystery that may transcend conventional categories of experience. In 2017, a researcher with access to advanced audio processing technology analyzed recordings made within the mill building by various investigators over the decades. By filtering out ambient noise and enhancing specific frequency ranges, he isolated a persistent sound beneath the audible range, a rhythmic pattern that, when raised to human hearing levels, precisely matches the operational cadence of late 19th century textile looms. This subaudible mechanical rhythm continues uninterrupted through all recordings, regardless of time of day, weather conditions, or recording equipment used. The building remembers, the researcher concluded in his privately circulated findings. Or perhaps more accurately, the activity that defined the building's purpose has imprinted itself on the physical space in ways we don't fully understand. The looms of the Harmony Textile Company are still operating in some sense, still weaving their patterns, still connecting threads across dimensions we can barely perceive. This concept, that the act of weaving as practiced in the Harmony Mill might have implications beyond the physical production of textiles, recurs throughout the case history. From Frederick Harmony's cryptic comments to mill workers about patterns and their power, to Eleanor's disturbing dream of looms weaving people rather than fabric, to the unusual properties of the textiles produced, there emerges a consistent motif. Weaving as a form of reality manipulation, as a means of connecting or traversing different states of existence. Textile production, after all, is among humanity's oldest technologies, a method of creating structure and form from loose, unconnected elements. The metaphorical power of weaving permeates language and mythology across cultures, We speak of the fabric of reality, the tapestry of time, the threads of fate. Ancient myths from diverse traditions feature weaving deities who determine human destiny or create the physical world through their craft. In this context, the Harmony case takes on an archetypal quality, less a simple historical mystery than a manifestation of something primal and profound. The missing family, the abandoned mill, the strange patterns that persist decades later, all might be understood as visible symptoms of an invisible process, surface disturbances created by movements in the depths. The case remains officially unsolved. The disappearance of the Harmony family is still listed in Massachusetts state records as an open investigation, though no active pursuit of leads has occurred since the 1960s. The material evidence, journals, photographs, artifacts recovered from the river cave, resides in various archives and historical collections, studied occasionally by researchers but yielding no definitive conclusions. Perhaps this is as it should be. Some mysteries by their nature resist solution. They exist not to be resolved but to remind us of the limits of knowledge, the boundaries of perception, the vast territories that lie beyond our understanding. For the residents of modern Wickfield, the Harmony case has become part of the town's identity, a historical footnote that occasionally attracts tourists or paranormal enthusiasts, but no longer dominates local conversation. The mill building, now housing artists' studios and small retail spaces, has been renovated multiple times, each renovation subtly altering its connection to the past. Only the oldest residents remember the stories told by their grandparents, stories of a family that seemed perfect from a distance, but harbored secrets too dangerous to confront directly. And yet, the pattern persists. Every few years, someone new becomes obsessed with the case. A historian, a paranormal researcher, a curious local teenager delving into town archives. They follow the same paths, ask the same questions, experience the same unsettling dreams. Some abandon their investigations abruptly. Others develop elaborate theories that satisfy themselves but convince few others. The pattern repeats, like a shuttle moving back and forth across a loom, creating the same design with different threads. In the archives of the Berkshire Historical Society, the Harmony case files remain available to researchers by special appointment. Few make such requests. Those who do report a curious phenomenon. When taking notes on the materials, their handwriting often shifts subtly toward the end of the session, becoming more angular, more precise, bearing an unsettling resemblance to the unidentified hand that wrote the final entry in Frederick Harmony's recovered journal. The case officially remains open, one of the oldest unsolved disappearances in Massachusetts history. But no active investigation has been pursued since 1968. When the last attempt to resolve the mystery was abandoned. Some questions, it seems, are meant to remain unanswered. Some patterns, once established, resist all attempts to break them. And in the quiet houses of Wickfield, when the autumn wind blows down from Ridgewood Hill, some say you can still hear the rhythmic sound of looms working in the night, weaving threads into patterns that were old when Frederick Harmony first arrived in town, and will continue long after all who remember his name have returned to dust. In the words of Deputy Prescott's final reflection, the Harmonies were never truly here, and they never truly left. They exist in that uncertain territory between presence and absence, between memory and forgetting. Perhaps that's where they always were, not quite within our world, but adjacent to it, separated by a barrier as thin and permeable as a length of finely woven cloth. As this narrative concludes, we return to the present moment, to you, listening to this account, perhaps in darkness, perhaps alone. The Harmony case offers no satisfying resolution, no moment of revelation that transforms mystery into clarity. It remains what it has always been, a pattern without a clear beginning or end, a weaving of facts and speculations that creates something larger than its individual threads. If there is a lesson to be found in the Harmony disappearance, perhaps it is this: reality is not as solid as we pretend. The boundaries between what we know and what we merely sense, between what exists and what might exist, are not fixed, but fluid. They shift according to patterns we may never fully comprehend. Tonight, as you consider the fate of Frederick and Eleanor Harmony, you might find yourself more attuned to the subtle wrongness that sometimes manifests in ordinary spaces, the peculiar acoustics of an empty room, the way shadows sometimes move independently of their sources, the sense of being observed when no observer is present. These perceptions are usually dismissed, filtered out by minds trained to focus on the explainable and the quantifiable. But perhaps, just perhaps, these moments of perceptual slippage are glimpses of what the Harmonies encountered, brief alignments between our reality and whatever exists adjacent to it, separated by a barrier as thin and permeable as the finest textile ever produced by the looms of the Harmony Textile Company. Listen carefully to the silence when this narrative ends. In that silence, you might hear something, a rhythmic clicking, distant but distinct. The sound of looms still weaving, still connecting threads across dimensions, still creating patterns that extend far beyond the limits of human understanding. The pattern never breaks. The weaving never ceases. And somewhere in a space we cannot access but occasionally sense, the Harmony family continues its existence, neither fully gone nor fully present, suspended in the interstice between worlds, a thread in a vast tapestry we can perceive only in fragments and echoes. The loom never stops turning,